All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome in. My name is Jeff Belisario. I'm the Executive Director of the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute. We're the council's think tank. We write reports, we make charts and graphs, and we attempt to tell the story, both of the Bay Area economy, but also key policy issues facing the region and the state. So today, as part of our Bay Area Impact Series, we have a special webinar. We're going to do a panel, like we always do. We have an expert all-star panel to talk about the wildfire crisis and solutions to it. But we're also happy to release a report this morning from the Economic Institute looking at the true costs of wildfires in California. And we really came at this with the idea that wildfires are becoming, if they're not already, an economic crisis for the state. They're not just about the communities that have been devastated and that are at risk. That's clearly a large issue, but increasingly fires and the smoke they produce have health costs. They have costs to tourism and employment and the economy at large. And we're trying to put all of those things together in this report. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start with just 5 minutes to tell you a little bit about what's in that report, set the stage for our panel, and then we hope to use the bulk of the time for just a fantastic panel that brings perspectives from the federal government, state government, the insurance industry, and an on-the-ground perspective from those that are protecting our communities. So just as a quick reminder, before we get rolling, please do use the Q&A function and the chat function. We do have time for questions at the end. We hope to get to them, and we'll definitely want to make sure that we incorporate as much audience participation in this as we can. So let me share my screen here, and we'll get going on some of our key findings to set up this panel that are in the report we released this morning. Just a quick commercial, you can find the report at bayareaeconomy.org. So we looked at the true cost of wildfires in California, but to do that, we really wanted to start off by saying, how has the wildfire situation changed? And I think this is clear to everyone that's living in the Bay Area, living in California, that has experienced it. But you can see from this chart, just the immense growth in the size of wildfires in our state over the last 30 years. Usually a wildfire season over 1 million acres burned was newsworthy. But then in 2020, we burned over 4 million acres in the state. Last count this morning in 2021, we've burned now 3 million acres in the state of California. So it's clear from this chart, the crisis is escalating. Fires are becoming more intense, causing more damage, causing more air quality impacts across the entire state. So what we wanted to do in the report, though, was look at the various different ways that wildfires are impacting the state economy. And first and foremost, we wanted to look at the losses, the physical losses caused by wildfires in our communities, for our businesses, personal property, and homes here. And you can see this chart. This is a chart of California's most destructive wildfires. You can see many of them occurring in just the last 5 years. Losses now counted in billions, no longer millions of dollars. But this chart is also a chart of the top 10 most destructive wildfires in the US. So wildfire in California, definitely going together, and definitely a huge issue, a growing issue for our state going forward, both as we think about the risk of wildfires and people wanting to live here, but also our economy at large. So again, you see the Camp Fire, Butte County, you see some of the North Bay fires here from 2017, causing billions of dollars in damages. But that's a large piece, but that's not the only piece we really wanted to count in our reporting. So you can see here, we've counted this number. Other outlets have also counted this number, more than $100 billion in economic losses in California from the 2018 wildfire season, where we can pull good data. And you can see here in the Bay Area, part of those costs are health costs. The particulate matter, the pollution, people with asthma and different respiratory illnesses, leading to higher rates of hospitalization, different health costs from that. So we can look here, $8 billion in costs for health-related costs in the Bay Area in 2018 related to wildfires. And then we also count roughly $17 billion in business losses. So these are things like tourism, employment impacts, people actually moving out of areas and not spending their money on things like retail and restaurants. So again, it's not just about the physical losses, it's about how fire is reshaping the California and the Bay Area economy. One of the other pieces we really focused on the report is looking up at the North Bay. So here and a lot of numbers here, but we can do this on Zoom. I'm showing population trends in the North Bay and Sonoma County here. You can see Santa Rosa in the middle, the county population total just below it. And you can see here from 2017 on, the county of Sonoma has actually been losing population. So not only is fire a risk for those communities, it's also something that's pushing people out of those communities altogether. So this is partially people not rebuilding after fire, and this is partially also just the risk of fire going forward makes these places potentially less attractive to live. So I don't want to focus too much on the past. You can check out the report. We look a lot at the numbers here, but what we also do in the report is we look forward, and how do we as a state and as a region get our arms around this very, very complex issue of wildfire. And first, we really look at prevention, and we're going to hear a lot about this in the panel. But we talk a lot about investing in forest health projects at scale. We talk about building regional coalitions that can tackle fire at fire shed levels. We know that fire doesn't obey county lines, it doesn't obey city lines. So how do we create coalitions of the public and private sector to build preparedness plans, to build investment plans in forests at a fire shed level? Two, we're not going to prevent all wildfires, so how do we protect our assets going forward? We look a lot at providing more incentives, whether those are rebates or loan programs at the state or local level for home hardening investments to ensure that our homes are as strong as they can be to withstand wildfire. Three, and we're going to hear about this as well, we look at innovation. How do we create new models for forest management that take advantage of some of the economic opportunity for sustainable wood products, but also then can lead to a more resilient and wildfire resistant forest in California. And then lastly, and potentially the most difficult one, is we look at transforming land use. And the map here, we look at areas of high fire risk and also high population density. You can see a lot of the East Bay highlighted here. And we talk a lot about the wild urban interface, where 1/3 of California homes are now in that wild urban interface. Much of our new home construction in the last 2 decades is in that wild urban interface. So if we're going to limit future construction there, which we think would be a benefit to keep homes out of those risky areas, we do need to then allow home construction in other less risky areas. So at the Bay Area Council, we're doing a lot of work on housing supply, and we do think a housing supply solution that is suburban and urban is actually one of the solutions to the wildfire crisis as well. So with that, and that just sets up the conversation today. I encourage you to go to bayareaeconomy.org to check out the full report. But I want to turn to our expert panel for the remainder of the 50 minutes here. And again, please use the Q&A. But let me very, very quickly just introduce our panelists. First, we have Lorna Castillo. She's Senior Vice President of State Product Management for CSA Insurance Group. We have Mark Hein. He's the Fire Chief of the Sonoma County Fire District. Jessica Morse is the Deputy Secretary for Forest and Wildland Resilience for the California Natural Resources Agency. And John Watts is Senior Counselor for U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein, advising the Senator on issues related to water, fire, and natural resources in the West. And I'm actually going to turn it all over to our moderator. We're very happy to have Janet Ruiz, the Director of Strategic Communications for the Insurance Information Institute, moderate our panel today. And I've instructed the panel to keep it forward-looking, keep it solutions-oriented. This is a very complex issue for the state, a major issue for the state, and a lot of great work is being done. So we're excited to hear about it from the panel today. And Janet, let me turn it over to you to lead us in the questions. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And thanks to the Bay Area Economic Council for doing this wonderful report that's so informative. And I love the focus today. And I love that we bring together a variety of people from all different disciplines who can really talk about some of the solutions and where are we going? How are we going to, become more resilient communities? And here at the Insurance Information Institute, we're an insurance trade association. We're a nonprofit, we don't lobby. But we are supported by the insurance industry to help people understand insurance, what it does, how it works. And one of our major initiatives is resilience in communities. We set up a resilience accelerator. It's at resilience.iii.org. Feel free to take a look at that later. But today we want to jump in and really talk about some of these solutions, the issues. How are we tackling them? So let's start with you, Chief Hein. Your on the ground perspective is a great place to start a conversation. When you think about Sonoma County fire preparedness and protection, tell us what's working and maybe what's not, what you're looking to change.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be with the panel today on a topic that's, of course, near and dear to my heart. So I have 40 years of career service in the fire service, all primarily in the North Bay. So in the last 5 years has certainly been extraordinary in the lifespan of my career with regards to wildfires. They're burning at incredible rates of spread. They're entering populated areas very quickly. They're causing massive infrastructure damage, which results in very significant economic impacts, not only to the communities impacted, but to the local governments as well. So, when I look at this, I look at what's working well and what's not working well. What's working well is we're all paying attention. We're here today, and that's what is working well. We're building collaborations that address the issues of climate, that are addressing our building issues, preparedness and response. And I'm proud that we are, as a community together, coming together to look at this significant issue. We have significantly improved the methods that we use to communicate emergency messaging to the public. Those are lessons learned out of the major fires going back to 2017 and over the last 4 to 5 years. And we're changing our strategy and tactics as professionals in this on how we address the wildfire threat through improved technologies and improved use of different firefighting resources. What's not working well, more importantly for me, is what we need to be focused on, is we need a good collective definition of what vegetation management is. Well, how do we define that term collaboratively together so that we can put some meaningful programs in place and meaningful funding for those programs that will make differences in the landscape, the vegetation management programs that we need to implement throughout all the Western states, but certainly in California. We don't do enough right now to support our private property owners, the homeowners, the business owners that have a desire and a passion to want to step forward and prepare their properties more effectively, either through home or business hardening, use of different materials in construction, or defensible space work on vegetation. They need our funding support, they need access to programs, and they need access to services. So we need to do a better job of stepping up for them. There's one avenue that is being often overlooked in all the wildfire threats and the impacts. And while we're here today to focus on economic impacts, our communities that have experienced and lived through these major devastating wildfires have a high degree of stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder for our communities and for our first responders is a major issue right now. It's also one of the reasons that Jeff alluded to in his introductory slides that we are losing local residents out of our county and we're losing residents out of the state of California. Overall, we're learning, we are adapting, we're making good positive changes. The fires right now, however, are outpacing our coalition approach, but developing a coalition like we have here today is going to go a long ways to helping us address this big threat from wildfire. So I look forward to the rest of the discussions this morning, and I hope that that provides a little bit of framework, Janet, moving forward.
Thanks. I think that's, you hit great points there. And now I'd like to go over to John Watts. What's the current status of wildfire-related legislation? Can you give the audience a sense of some of the major policy changes and investments that are being proposed and or approved?
Well, as a staff and member of Congress, it's not always that I can deliver good news. Congress is not always known for good news, but today there is very good news in 2 bills that are passing. One, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and secondly, what's known as the Build Back Better bill, which is President Biden's social policy bill. Between these 2 bills, they are going to dramatically increase for the next decade federal funding for the wildfire problem. Starting off with, they will quadruple, multiply by 4 times federal funding for fuel reduction, forest thinning, prescribed fire efforts. The current budget, federal budget, is about $5 billion over a decade for those efforts. And these bills include between them $16 to $17 billion. You add that to the $5 billion through regular appropriations, we will be over $20 billion in federal funding for fuel reduction over the next decade, which is quadrupling where we have been previously, which is a huge improvement. Secondly, Senator Feinstein a provision that's in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which provides $600 million for converting 1,000 seasonal federal firefighters to permanent firefighters and increasing federal firefighter pay by up to $20,000 per individual to largely close a pay gap with state and local firefighters. We have a shortage of federal firefighters. Federal government manages 58% of forests in California. This is something we need to do. Thirdly, in responding to what the chief said, we need to give more incentives to people to improve their homes and reduce fuels on their property. There is $3.5 billion in these two bills for weatherization assistance programs to help homeowners make their homes more energy efficient and fire resistant. And there also are tax credits. There's a 30% tax credit for homeowners who reduce hazardous fuels on their land, and then state subsidies for weatherization or fire resistance improvements efforts or earthquake disaster improvement efforts are made tax exempt. You don't have to pay taxes on any state subsidies for those efforts. That will really help reward what people are doing, what the chief was talking about. Thirdly, there's $5 billion in these bills for utilities to underground power lines and to coat them to make them more fire resistant. You probably all heard fires sparked by utilities are a major cause of especially many of our largest fires the last few years. In addition to that, there is $775 million in the bill for another effort, another piece of what Jeff was talking about, which is to provide grants to help build facilities that process the small diameter wood that come off the national forest or off other forests from fuel reduction efforts. So we'll try to build local jobs out of these bills as well. So there are many significant pieces of these bills that I think will really make a big difference. The last thing I want to say on the legislative front is the big challenge with all this money is helping the Forest Service get the money out the door, because it's, if you quadruple an agency's budget, it can be hard to spend the money effectively. The Senate Energy Committee is going to try to early next year move legislation that will increase capability of the Forest Service to process this funding. Senator Feinstein has a bill in that mix that would fund landscape scale forest restoration efforts based on collaborative solutions the chief was talking about, where there's an assessment of the forest landscape of 100,000 acres or more. Communities come together and collaborate. How can we treat these really big acreages and work together? And then there'll be federal funding to help do that. So good news for once from Congress. I think these bills will be really helpful.
Thanks so much, John. And let's go over to Jessica. Can you tell us a little bit, the state is allocating significant amounts of funding to wildfire resilience. So can you talk a little more about how that money will be put to use?
Absolutely, thanks, Janet. And we are so excited for the federal funding coming in, and we hope a huge chunk of that's going to come to California because we are ready. The state just invested $1.5 billion into California for wildfire resilience alone. So that's in addition to the fire suppression budget. So this is really across three core fronts of fire resilience, and all three of these fronts work together to deliver lasting fire resilience. So we invest across landscapes so that we are lowering the fuel intensity, so that we're lowering the intensity of those wildfires, returning them back to their normal ecological role on the landscape across those big watersheds. The next area is interventions like strategic fuel breaks in and around communities. So firefighters have a chance to take a stand against a wildfire, like we saw during the Caldor fire, where those fuel breaks dropped the flame length from 150 feet to 15 feet in those neighborhoods in South Lake Tahoe. And again, that also gives folks a chance to be able to escape during these large wildfires. So putting in those strategic fuel breaks, which give firefighters that tactical advantage. And then the last area is interventions inside of those communities. So that's the home hardening and defensible space, where we're making our homes less susceptible, so that you stop having, so that the homes don't then become the ignition source. Because as we've seen in major fires, once the homes start igniting, the heat level is so intense that there's very few interventions that you could have made in the construction that would make an impact. So getting to a level where you have that saturation of home hardening and defensible space so that the homes don't ignite, having those defensible fuel breaks to be able to give firefighters a chance to be able to modify the behavior of that fire and get communities out, and then lowering the intensity across the landscape. And this budget actually spans 40 different programs. So there's a lot of detail in here on that landscape scale. We've got funding for small landowners, like Mark was mentioning, specifically increasing a pilot program we had from $2 million to $50 million so that small forested landowners get that support. We've got funding for state parks, Department of Fish and Wildlife, so that our state-owned land is in really good shape. And then we have huge amounts of grants to be able to tackle that watershed scale effort. And then the last area that we're investing in addition to direct and targeted projects across those 3 fire resilience fronts, we're also investing in those structural reforms that I've heard mentioned. So we're trying to transform the business sector around woody biomass and forested woody material so that we can actually create supply chains, create businesses and jobs. We have funding for workforce development, and we have funding for regulatory reform, and also better spatial analytics, like Mark was mentioning, so that we can actually reform these investments. And then all of these investments are anchored through a program that we call the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. And that'll have local partners that you guys will have heard of through many of our conservancies or your resource conservation districts. This is where we're funding planning tools and staffing tools so that we can have watershed scale fire resilient plans that then all of our buckets of grant dollars, state investments, and those federal investments can then anchor into unified coordinated plans. We'd seen that program piloted in many of the state really successfully, and that anchored a lot of our dollars. So for example, of this 1.5 billion, $500 million was released in an emergency appropriation in April so that we could get a jump start on this fire season and next fire season. And many of those dollars went into those regional collaboratives and invested in pipelines of projects, which came into play. We saw a fuel break built with those dollars, stop the big fire down in Santa Barbara a couple weeks ago. We saw a defensible chipping program to help homeowners get that support who couldn't afford it. Down in San Diego, create defensible space around 200 homes. And we saw 600 acres treated in South Lake Tahoe directly in it before the Caldor fire. So we've changed a lot of our state structures to get these dollars moving faster. And we're investing in programs that are proven to be able to scale up across those 3 fronts and build the infrastructure behind it that we need. So we're excited and grateful to have the federal funding, and we want to see them invest $1.5 billion to match ours in California, and that'll get things moving.
Thanks so much. That's all good news. And, you know, having this group together and being able to cover all the different aspects, the money's coming in, what is the fire community doing, you know, all these things working together, the legislative. So now, Lorna, I want to ask you, since extreme wildfires are pretty much the new normal here in California, being able to protect assets and restore communities after a wildfire becomes even more important. So can you talk about some of the programs CSA Insurance Group is implementing to better manage wildfire risk?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So hello, everyone. My name is Lorna Castillo, and I am the Vice President of State Product Management here at CSA Insurance Group. We've sold AAA branded auto and property insurance in Northern California for over 40 years. Just talking a little bit more about CSA, our enduring purpose is to help AAA members prevent, prepare for, and recover from life's uncertainties, including wildfires. California is our home state. We are headquartered here in Walnut Creek. Many of our employees and families live here, including myself. And because we live here, you know, we've witnessed firsthand the devastation of recent wildfires. I have family members who, you know, lived up in Paradise and were affected by the Camp Fire. So we're really kind of ingrained in California communities. This is not just a business issue for us. We're all personally invested in seeking out innovative ways to, protect our customers, protect our communities, and our own families in many cases. So thinking about our enduring purpose, as I mentioned, we're helping AAA members prevent, prepare for, and recover from life's uncertainties. And when you typically think of an insurance company, you think more of that last one, right? Which is an accident has happened or a wildfire has happened, and the insurance company is there to help you financially recover. But we think about it differently in that we're committed to help you prevent and prepare for, in addition to recovering from things such as wildfires. So talking a little bit about in the prevent space, the report talks about how fire suppression strategies over many decades has resulted in high fuel loads in our state's forests. In 2019, we at CSA, we invested $1 million in the Forest Resilience Bond, which helps restore California's forests. And we actually just increased our investment in that in 2021. In the prepare space, we are implementing what we think is an industry-leading insurance discount of up to 20% of your insurance premiums for California consumers. And for those ones who take some steps to prepare their home in case a wildfire might affect their community. You can think of such actions like the necessary steps such as clearing your brush or making your vents, covering your vents so that embers don't go into your property. So many different mitigation actions are going to be rewarded through a pretty healthy discount of up to 20%. And we're looking forward to bringing this to the market by year end. Now, the discount is great, right? And it's certainly going to help with the cost of making your home resilient. But it's really more than that for us. We're AAA brands. We've been in California for over 100 years in the automotive space and 40 years in the property space. In addition to rewarding through your insurance premiums, we're actually looking to educate our members and policyholders on where to even start. Can sometimes feel a little overwhelming in terms of how do I go about this for my home. So not only to provide that financial incentive through insurance premiums, but also, launching education materials. We have over 500 agents in California, in Northern California, and in neighborhoods with properties, your neighbors who can help you take that first step and provide materials to do so. And that helps with your insurance, but it also helps, protect your family's livelihood in your home. And then, we talked about prepare, prevent, and then we're also talking about, recover. So of course, we will be there in the event that a wildfire does affect your home and help you financially recover. So, for here at CSA, we really recognize that insurance is a huge part of the solution in living with wildfire in California. And we're looking to lean in and take the steps that are necessary, to help with this issue, such as, the panel here today, and driving towards that solution. So thank you, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Lorna. Those are really great answers to some of the questions I'm already seeing in the chat on what insurance companies are doing. And CSA is certainly leading the way on mitigation and educating consumers. And we're seeing that. I think that's a big theme throughout our discussion, is helping people understand what to do, but also helping with the financing of it. As Jessica talked about, all these things will make it easier for all of us. I live in a wildfire risk area too, so I deal with this on a daily basis, and I'm always interested in, what's going to make my home, my community more resilient. Chief Hein, I wanted to check in with you now that we've talked a little bit about some of the policy and regulations and things that are changing in DC and Sacramento. Where do you see a need for greater investment or policy change?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So I think much of it's been addressed, and I think in the earlier discussions, particularly in John sharing what is in some of these recent bills that's been passed. And that is a huge step forward. From my perspective, I have state legislators and national legislators that are very engaged now. They're very attentive to the issues of wildfire, particularly in the Western states. And I think that's very, very helpful. We need funding and legislative support that continues to focus on effective vegetation management programs, both locally and on a more global level. We need the cost offsets that have already been discussed for homeowners and business owners that are desperate to do the right thing, but simply don't know how to access any support. I have a large elderly constituency that I serve across Sonoma County, and they have their hearts and their minds are in the right place. They want to do the right things for their property, but they physically can't do it, and they need access to service support that can help them harden their homes and do proper veg management. I desperately need funding support at a federal and state level to address the issue of first responder wellness. PTSD is off the charts right now for first responders. A lot of my personnel have been on the front lines of 4 out of 5 the state's biggest fires now that have been occurring in Sonoma County. We have lost career firefighters to the career because of it. We're continuing to see the depletion of the ability to hire good quality workforce. And it's taken a big toll on first responders overall. And finally, the one aspect of economic impact that gets lost in the discussions on serious wildfires is the impact of the local government agencies affected by the fires. In 2017, those fires destroyed 2 fire districts in the county of Sonoma. Fire districts in particular, unlike cities, rely 90% on property tax revenue for their revenue stream. So when a wildfire comes to town and it emaciates communities and destroys infrastructure, it also destroys the very fire district that is responsible for responding to that incident. So those are the areas, and many of the areas that this collaboration today is already addressed, but those areas of wellness of first responders and stabilization funding for the local governments horribly impacted by having to respond to these incidents. Because what traditionally happens is once the fire itself is over and the visibles of that fire are over, we forget about the infrastructure damage that was left behind because another incident has already occurred.
Thanks. Those are certainly important concerns and something that we need to keep in mind. John, a significant piece of California is forested land and are managed federally. Are there changes that you're envisioning to the relationship between state and federal government on how forest investments, wildfire suppression are handled on those lands?
Yes, I think there needs to be further cooperation sort of across both ways. One, I mentioned, Senator Feinstein championed this provision, which is going to be enacted now, which will provide a federal tax credit if you get state funding to improve the fire resistance of your home. And so right now, if the state writes you a check to pay for improving your home prior to this, you would have been taxed on that state check. Now you won't be. So coordinating between state and federal incentives to help homeowners do more is one thing. Another thing is, I do think that over the long term, as much of the additional federal funding as we've gotten, it's going to require some state funding assistance, even on federal land, to keep the forests in a lower risk condition. The best evidence is you need to not only do forest thinning projects, but you need to go in every decade or 15 years and then do prescribed burns to keep the forest from building up the fuel loads. And that's going to take a lot of money over the millions and millions of acres we have in the West. So what California's doing, and I'd be interested in Jessica's thoughts on this, but what California's doing with the governor's 1.5 billion, some of that can go to help be a cost share for federal funding on federal forests to keep the forests in a low risk condition. That'll be really helpful.
Yeah, John, just to kind of answer your question on that one, what's been helpful is that the state and federal partnerships have been really strong on the ground and in the field. And California's increased, just to give you guys this perspective on how much funding we increased. So the first time we've had dedicated funding for wildfire resilience was $200 million a year starting in 2018. And then this year we increased that to 1.5 billion. And so we're seeing a dramatic surge in those dollars. But before this year, out of that 200 million a year, the California spent $118 million over the last 5 years in grants to the U.S. Forest Service. And so we have been investing very consistently in federal land. And that delivered results. We had some early action dollars that got us acres treated in the Caldor fire. But before that, we had a massive collaborative between the U.S. Forest Service, the State Tahoe Conservancy, the Tahoe Regional Planning Authority, and state parks that had been building a coalition, a network of strategic fuel breaks in and around unprescribed fires around that Christmas Valley and Myers area in South Lake Tahoe. And it's amazing when you look at the maps and you talk to the firefighters on the ground, they were able to stage themselves in, and again, it's a fuel break. So that means it's actually just a thinned bit of forest land. So you walk into it and you think I'm standing in a forest, but it's actually a strategic fuel break. And so it modified that fire behavior, and those firefighters on the ground, I spoke to them, they were able to utilize that. And we have examples of this throughout the state. But the challenge is that when the Forest Service has been so dramatically underfunded that even with sort of the state investments, we're not able to meet the scale of the crisis. So in the Feather River watershed, where the Dixie Fire is and the Camp Fire and the Story Fire, there's kind of a wildfire riptide that has been happening in the Feather River watershed, which I just want to remind you guys is the headwaters of the state water project. So it's a huge portion of our state's water. And so when that watershed is damaged by these continual fires, it's really dramatic. But one of the things we've been seeing is that, the Story Fire in, I forget the year it was, but it was about 2 decades ago, came through and wiped out some of the Lassen National Forest. That didn't get reforested, so it converted to chaparral. That shrub burns hotter and faster. And so what we've been seeing is these areas that had forested land type conversion, because there weren't resources to do the post-fire restoration and reforestation, meant that it created this kind of riptide of wildfire coming through. And so we not only have to thin out sort of the green forests and do that protection, but we also have to work with our federal partners to make sure that those large swaths of federal land are restored and recovered, so that we're not then getting this exacerbating impact. So yeah, and but I think one of the things that kind of we wrestle with in California is like, we recognize these wildfires are not pausing at jurisdictional boundaries. They're not going up to federal land and saying, oh, okay, this wasn't funded, I better move around it. And so we'll require that sort of those co-investments, but right now, before this funding that just came, that is, on the precipice of coming through, California taxpayers had been paying, twice for every acre in California that was treated. You paid your state taxes and your federal taxes to be able to get the same acre treated. And so now we will be surging activities, not only by increasing our state investments, but if the federal investments match that, then we'll be actually keeping pace with this crisis.
Thanks, Jessica. I think, between you and John, you've hit a lot of the answers to questions that are in the Q&A. So really great answers and so much information on who's doing what and where, and definitely gives us hope that the funding is getting to the right places, and we have people like you who are watching it and making sure these things happen. Lorna, I'd like to turn to you now and just tell us a little bit about how can the insurance industry work with regulators and policymakers to create a more sustainable and transparent insurance marketplace in California?
Yeah, great question. So I think really my fellow panel members have hit on this multiple times, and I just underline it here, which is it's going to be absolutely imperative that we realize we're in this together. It's not going to be useful for us to look back or say, hey, this person needs to do this. We all need to do our part and take that first step and the second step and just do it all together and be collaborative and open and share ideas. And that's how we think about it here at CSA as well, right? So, loss mitigation is a huge part of that, and working with the Department of Insurance and regulators to figure out how can we, work together to encourage properties and communities to mitigate their losses, and how can we, provide incentives for that through insurance. We spoke about individual home hardening earlier and how we are introducing a discount, for that up to 20%. And we're also, looking to do community discounts as well. You think about community efforts, to help prepare for wildfires. And honestly, it's maybe even more important than an individual, property owner taking steps just on their home. You can imagine a scenario where, you do everything to prepare your home, for that, for a potential wildfire, and all those actions will certainly help. But if your home's surrounded by unmaintained brush or dry or dead grass from neighbors, or things such as a community park with trees hanging over your home, you're still going to be at risk. So to help with this, we actually just recently worked with the California Department of Insurance to introduce a community fire mitigation program discount. So if in addition to your property discount, taking steps for your property, if you're part of and you're able to you lean in with your community to join programs such as Firewise, you'll get an additional discount on your insurance here at CSA. I also think it's important that, we need to use technology and tools at our disposal to further understand and thus manage wildfire risk. We actually are working right now to explore how we can partner with some various third-party vendors to understand varying risks in different neighborhoods. There's a ton of data out there. So how do we leverage that data to really understand on a granular level wildfire? And not just wildfire in general, but also, wildfire for specific members' risk situations. Not all vegetation is made equal. And if you're surrounded by grass versus dry brush, you're going to be at a different level of risk. And so we've been leaning in with the Department of Insurance and with regulators to figure out, how can we take this information and all this data and use it to help California communities and policyholders. And reward them for that through insurance affordability and availability in the name of discounts. We're actually, being in the Bay Area, we're actually at a bit of an advantage here. There's a ton of smart people, there's a ton of data, there's a ton of advanced analytics capabilities to help us understand wildfire. And it's not always, easy to understand on the surface. So, working with the Department of Insurance and with regulators to say, hey, sometimes this is just a trust exercise. We have to take a step forward, and we will test and learn and, do our best collectively to solve this. So, just to kind of, wrap it up, it's going to take everybody. It's going to take us, it's going to take regulators, it's going to take the Department of Insurance, it's going to take research and technology companies, our firefighting heroes. They're really the ones in here that are in the trenches making a big difference, and Californians overall, right? So protecting our properties and understanding our individual properties and our communities to lean in and tackle it together.
Thanks, Lorna. And I would want to throw in here, that CSAA has done so much work on this, and being a California company, I think you're so aware of the risks that we're facing. One of the other things the industry does, and I know CSAA supports this as well, is we do fund the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They are located in South Carolina. They have a huge research facility there. And they are actually coming up with some programs that we're using in the insurance industry, but also, they work with a lot of other groups like CAL FIRE and all the fire services, NFPA, et cetera, Western Fire Chiefs Association, to get the research a little more standardized so that folks really know, what's your commercial building, what's your home, what are the real things that you can do that we are seeing are keeping fire away and keeping buildings and structures more resilient. And, the term living with wildfire keeps coming up, fire adapted communities. And so we really support this as an industry for the sake of, the folks we're insuring, but also for the whole community so that you can become more resilient. And one of the questions in the chat is regarding commercial property insurance and can you separate wildfire from fire? That's a challenge because fire can start in so many different ways. And when do you determine it's a wildfire and a catastrophe, et cetera? So I haven't seen that coming into play yet, but I did want to mention that question that was in the chat. At this point, I think we're still looking at wildfire as fire and keeping it in the policies that we offer to commercial and homeowners. And I think we are looking at all these solutions on preventing, being more resilient to actually be the answers to continuing in commercial and personal lines insurance in California. The important message is we want to be a part of California. We want to insure Californians. So we're not looking to leave the state. We want to be here. We want to make it work really well. So let's go back to Chief Hein. We have a few different questions and I'll let you address what you think is pertinent. One is on the volunteer fire services. How do you see those? How are those working in Sonoma County?
Yeah, it's a good question from the writer. I appreciate that. So in Sonoma County, there is still a strong presence of volunteer firefighting community. And you'll see this throughout the state of California. Much of the fire service was rooted in volunteer firefighting. The challenges of us continuing to run volunteer fire programs is that the volunteer firefighters have to be equally educated, equally skilled, equally certified, equipped with all the same equipment, and trained to all the same standards as career firefighters. And that is a hefty toll to ask somebody who's holding down a career and an outside personal life to continue to serve in that capacity. And then there's the safety risk of it, which is you're not doing this as a career job every day. And you pop in and out of some of these large wildfires, large flood incidents, and things that the fire service is involved in, poses a fairly significant challenge for safety and managing that workforce effectively. So I don't see us ever abandoning the volunteer firefighting community. I think they still provide an essential backbone to first responder in California, but I think the world for volunteer firefighters has changed dramatically.
Thank you. And another question is on biomass, and I'm not sure who would like to take it, so I'll let you jump in. Where will all of the biomass generated be by more aggressive, appropriate vegetation management go? Is there an expansion of the California timber industry? Can anyone talk about that?
I'm happy to take the first crack at it. It's something that we're thinking a lot about because the challenge we have with forest management is that it does create these slash piles. And also California's mills, because of all the post-fire salvage that's happening, they're at capacity. And so even trees that are sort of potentially merchantable that could go into local housing are instead getting chipped and landfilled. I mean, there were examples in the CZU complex where trucks of redwood chips were then getting trucked to Lovelock, Nevada to be, right? So that's really a negative carbon cycle, not the direction we want this carbon cycle to be going. And so what we are doing is trying to create an entire infrastructure to utilize that woody material in a way that is better than a wildfire and better than landfilling or open pile burning. The challenge we have is that there are these massive slash piles already all over the state. And just some of these are the size of like small strip malls or multi-story buildings. I mean, these are not kind of a little campfire sized slash pile. And so during the Caldor fire and the Dixie fire, CAL FIRE knows where they are and has to often dedicate an entire fire engine to watering down the slash pile during an active fire so that it doesn't essentially become a bomb. And so we need to be able to move that woody biomass material urgently so that it increases our force capacity during active fires, as well as meets our carbon targets. So the state has a lot of tools that we are adding to this toolbox, and our federal partners are doing the same. And our goal is to empower local communities and businesses to start scaling up our use of this material. So one of the big things we've invested in is the Climate Catalyst Fund. It's low interest loans and loan guarantees for anybody wanting to start a business that is using woody materials. So that's everything from a traditional small sawmill to converting that to jet fuel or liquid hydrogen. So there's a lot of innovation in this space as well, and a lot of uses for the different material coming off the forest. And so we've started that up so we can get capital moving. We've put in somebody at GoBiz, the Governor's Office of Business, to be able to help us attract larger scale businesses to this space. A great example is something called mass timber, which compresses smaller woody material into, or 2x4 sometimes, into a material that replaces I-beams and steel and concrete in construction. And we just changed California's building codes to allow up to 18 stories now to be built out of this mass timber. So we're trying to get that industry going. Another example is that we invested just a grant through the Sierra Nevada Conservancy with a partnership to jumpstart a local sawmill in the footprint of the Dixie Fire. So rather than trucking those dead logs out 100 miles and then 100 miles back to Greenville, this one is started up by a local 5th generation logger in the area, in the town of Crescent Mills, which hasn't had a mill for a long time, on an old mill site. And then you only have to truck the wood 5 miles, you mill it on site, and then it comes back to Greenville to help that town recover. And that also gets to what Mark was talking about with the PTSDs. These communities are traumatized. And so while it's not recovering, it's a small balm to know that the tree off of your property is helping rebuild the fence on your property, and helping, it just gives a little piece of those communities that we're creating closed loops. Another thing we've invested in is the Joint Institute for Wood Products Innovation, which helps us identify this suite of technology and tools that are available to consume and utilize this woody material and what otherwise would be slash piles. And the last thing we're doing is trying to jumpstart a supply chain for this. And so what's been a challenge is that the state, since we don't own most of our land, can't give off long-term supply agreements. And so even though there's a ton of material coming off, if it's only coming off in like 2-year chunks, you can't get enough of a supply chain on that woody material from a region or a watershed to be able to then invest in the scale, the $1 million equipment that you need to be able to start those businesses. So we're creating pilot programs with the Office of Planning and Research at the Governor's Office, 5 pilots that are jump-starting woody biomass. There's kind of like middlemen or aggregators. And so they will create a supply chain for this, buying the woody material off all of our thousands of grant projects and Forest Service land, and then being able to get out feedstock supply agreements that are decades long. The other tool that the Forest Service has that we want to see them use more of, so this is for John's radar, is those 20-year shared stewardship. But the challenge we have is that they've only given off one in California. So the Forest Service, who owns their land, has the capacity to give them out, but the threshold and the regulatory process around it is really high. So seeing that, if there's some tools to simplify that so we can get more of those on the landscape, that could be a major anchor for the state to get this supply chain moving so that these slash piles get utilized instead of adding carbon and danger to our communities.
Thanks. And that kind of ties into another question that we have on water agencies that are on federal lands. And they use Grizzly Flat CSD as one example. And just the complexities that sometimes come up when you're trying to get approvals to repair and recover after wildfires. So they targeted that at John, but I don't know if John, you want to take that, or Jessica, you have thoughts on that?
Well, there are efforts to get water agencies involved in funding projects, and Lorna referenced the Forest Resilience Bond. I mean, their efforts to bring in water agencies as financial partners with the state and the Forest Service, and then their loans issued by insurance agencies, auto agencies, which really help achieve some of these long-term projects, and longer-term agreements, Jessica, that help with like the multi-year, 20-year stewardship contracts, because Forest Service hasn't had enough money to commit to those, but that's something Senator Feinstein's bill is trying to deal with. I don't know, Jessica, if you want to talk about the restoration aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the natural infrastructure is really crucial here, that often our dollars only focus, and especially our post-fire recovery dollars, like the FEMA dollars, tend to focus on the physical water infrastructure rebuild. And what we're missing is sort of that much larger scale rebuild of the natural infrastructure and our entire watersheds. Sonoma County is one of the only examples I know that was able to use FEMA post-fire recovery dollars to do larger level landscape recovery, and they did a really good job with it, trying to protect their watershed. The Yuba County Water Agency in California has also been made that connection, and they are investing in their watershed. And then Marin County owns their water district owns their watershed, so they've been really great examples of that forest to faucet steward. But we need to get thinking more in this forest to faucet mindset. There's great research coming out of UC Merced that is looking at forest hydrology, and the Dixie Fire is a wake-up call for everybody, because it's a huge percentage of the Feather River watershed that burned in this fire alone. When you have nearly a 1 million acre fire, it is an incredibly devastating, and it's at a high severity. I just want to emphasize that what the challenge isn't that fire's happening, it's happening at high severity, and it's devastating the watershed. So getting our water districts and our water agencies to really start thinking about at scale forest hydrology, that's really a crucial tool, but also restructuring some of our post-fire recovery dollars so that it's just automatic, that when FEMA is helping support rebuilding roads, they should also be helping recover those watersheds, because that's going to be where you start arresting the compounding climate cycles we're seeing of fire, of heat, drought, fire, which then exacerbates more drought, which then exacerbates the fire. And so we need to be able to arrest that cycle, and that natural infrastructure of those forested watersheds are a crucial tool, that it's all hands on deck.
Thanks. And one of the last questions I'm going to throw out and then hand it back over to Jeff. I think we've already covered to an extent, but it's still being asked. And Lorna, maybe you can give us your thoughts on this. What are the factors that make it difficult or hard to afford for homeowners to have fire insurance? So what are you seeing as the solutions for that? If you could just take that one.
Yeah, of course. And Janet, you're right. I think we've hit on this a few times, but in my opinion, it's going to take us all leaning in together, right, to solve this issue, right? If we just go with status quo and just do what we've been doing for decades, we're not going to have a vibrant and competitive insurance market with affordable prices. What we've been doing over the past few years, and I've seen many companies, as well as regulators, Department of Insurance, firefighting techniques, etc., make progress towards having that vibrant market that's needed to have affordability and availability of insurance. I mentioned our recent filing where we had wildfire mitigation discounts. We worked very, very closely with the Department of Insurance to, envision what that looks like, talk about how we educate Californians to take that first step in mitigating their property and their communities. And that's one piece of the puzzle of having that affordable and available insurance market. So having that partnership with the Department of Insurance, having partnership with tech companies to further understand wildfire and help pass that information back to individual property owners so they know based off of their particular home, what is the risk and how do we tackle reducing that risk? In addition to all of the macro things that we've talked about today with forest restoration and, advancements in firefighting capabilities, all of that is part of the recipe that's going to be required to have that vibrant insurance market going forward. And we're already on the path.
Thanks so much.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. And we've covered a lot of ground in 61 minutes here. We didn't get to all of the questions, so I would encourage the audience to engage in the Bay Area Council's work on this topic going forward through our Climate Resilience Committee. And let me just pause to thank the fantastic panel here. Janet, Lorna, Mark, Jessica, and John, really appreciate all of the wisdom you share with us and all of the work that each of you are doing on this topic. I think we talked a lot about solutions today, which is exactly what I was hoping to do. I wanted to leave the audience in a good mood on this topic. And I do hope, I don't know what the right timeline is, but I do hope if we come back in 2, 3, 5 years and have the same conversation, all the lines that I showed going up are at least flat, potentially going down. So I do think all of the work that is being done is transformational, and hope we see some of those positive effects coming soon. So let me close it up with that. Again, thank you to the panelists and the Janet, our moderator. Thank you to CSA and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District for sponsoring the report. My final commercial, the report is at bayareaeconomy.org for your lunchtime reading. So thank you all again. Have a great day.